Hey everyone, and welcome to Satisfactory News. Vehicle routes are going to be totally different in Satisfactory 1.2, and in this video I'm going to give you as comprehensive of a guide as I possibly can. A lot of people appreciated my vehicle route guide video that I made years ago, so I hope that you find this new one useful. So vehicle paths were dropped on us with pretty minimal explanation in the patch notes, so I spent hours building vehicle routes and observing how different vehicles behaved in them, so I could give you the most accurate information possible. That said, a lot of this is based on observation. It's totally possible that I arrived at an incorrect conclusion in this video, so if your experience contradicts what I've said in this video, please let me know in the comments. The new route creation tool. The vehicle path tool is honestly a major step above the old method of manually driving a route. It's highly reminiscent of how train tracks work, but with a few notable differences. You can build with default mode and straight mode. Straight mode is decent for making straight lines, but the ideal use case for it is actually for making perfect sharp turns. Straight mode is a lot like straight belt build mode, which lets you make perfect 90-degree turns with your belts. So I recommend straight mode when making turns, especially on a flat grid-based system like a highway, and then default mode works for most other things, especially if you're on the ground using the natural environment, or if you just want a more gentle curve. When building, think of these paths a lot more like train tracks than the old truck routes. You don't need to layer paths over each other if you want two paths to occupy the same space. Instead, treat them exactly like railways and create connection points. If you have a straightaway you'd like a second vehicle route to utilize part of, you combine them in much the same way as a railway by literally just dragging the path over to it and connecting it when it snaps, making an intersection. However, while railways can only be attached like this on the end of a section of rail, paths don't care about that. You can connect them basically anywhere, even if it's in the middle of a section. This flexibility is really nice, and I hope that we get it for railways in the future. Unlike train tracks, vehicle paths are one way, which is indicated by the arrows on them. Your vehicle can only go forward. If you see a blue hologram, that means that that section of path is valid and has two complete connection points. If you see a yellow hologram, that means that that path does not have two valid connection points, either at 0 or 1. If it's red, that means the path is invalid for any number of reasons. You'll see red when building a path in a place that the vehicle can't fit, and you'll also see it if you manage to build something in the way of a path afterwards. However, I wouldn't say this system is absolutely perfect, as you can see in this clip, where I built a path that the truck cannot physically go on, yet it figures it out somehow. Platforms definitely have a lot more leeway than other things, I think that much is clear. Each vehicle has its own path creation tool, and each one has unique restrictions about things like turn radius. You can also use the universal path tool, which just has the strictest restrictions baked into it. If you make an explorer path, for example, you can only place an explorer on it, but if you use a universal path, any vehicle type can be placed on it. You just lose some flexibility while building it. It's also worth noting that factory carts can't actually use the universal path despite the word universal being right there. You can see here that the universal path is grayed out, while the actual factory cart path has color on it, indicating that that's the only one that's going to work. I measured the minimum distance that a turn can be for each vehicle path and determined that a factory cart needs 4 meters, explorers and tractors both need 8 meters, and trucks need a whopping 18 meters, meaning the universal path also needs 18 meters. The turn itself has to extend outwards, and that distance for each vehicle is actually just half of the turn distance. So 2 meters for the factory cart, 4 meters for the explorer and tractor, and 9 meters for the truck. So you have to consider how wide the turn will be, but also how long the turn will be and how much it sticks out from the route. Stations. Truck stations work in a very particular way in relation to their paths. If you build a station alongside a path, it'll snap to it, and you should be good to go. But if you build the station first, then the path, you have to do it in a specific way. If you simply build a path section past the station, vehicles won't be able to detect it. Instead, you have to specifically snap a path to the pause button hologram that's on the station, either by building to it or building from it. Stations can be set to load or unload cargo, and they have a fuel slot that can refuel vehicles that stop at them. There is also a toggle for whether a station will only fuel up vehicles that are already using that same fuel type, or if it should override that fuel type with whatever is in the truck station. This is a pretty interesting option, and using it should make the transition to different types of fuel a little more painless, as you don't need to go to each individual vehicle to swap its fuel type. You can just turn this setting on and start supplying your truck stations with turbo fuel instead of regular fuel, or whatever it is you're changing. Vehicles. Placing vehicles onto a route is exactly like placing trains. You can build them attached to the path and they'll just kind of stick there. If you build a vehicle off of the path, you'll still be able to use it by manually driving onto the path, and then once it's close enough, it'll pick up the stations and it'll sort of align itself magnetically. If you're not on the path, you won't be able to see any stations in the route tool. You can then go over to the Vehicle Path tab, where you will see the list of stations accessible by the path your vehicle is attached to. Again, very similar to the train system. However, be sure to name your truck stations, otherwise this will get confusing fast. Train stations get their own names based on cities in the world, but truck stations are all just called truck station until you change them. However, you can use the map while hovering over the name to see what station it corresponds to if you don't want to name them. To add a station to the route, just hit the plus button next to it and you'll see it added. The vehicle will go to them in order, starting with whatever one is physically next on the route, and you can consider this list to function like a circle, so the last stop goes back to the first one on the list. Hit the Enable Autopilot button at the bottom of the vehicle and it'll start moving. That's right, even with you in it. That is also a new feature of 1.2, that vehicles with autopilot on can move even when a player is inside of them. Again, a feature borrowed from trains that unifies these two mechanics a bit more. The last nice feature on this screen is the fuel cost. You can select any fuel type from the drop-down menu, and it will tell you based on your route how much fuel per trip and per minute will be consumed. This lets you know how much fuel you need to provide your vehicles via truck station. Intersections. While normal valid paths are blue, intersections on a path are green. Intersections work a little bit like block signals do in trains, but they're not exactly the same. First of all, they only care about vehicles that would collide at an actual crossing between two paths. They do not care about vehicles in front of them in the line. That system seems to have its own logic. Vehicles will simply slow and brake so they don't collide with anything in front of them. My only concern around this system is that sometimes they start braking pretty far back and seem to go slower than they need to, which could start to back up traffic behind it. So if you build paths that have a lot of potential for overlap or have a lot of vehicles on them, you should definitely watch and test before letting it run unattended. But if you're doing a lower quantity of vehicles across a long distance, this should never be a problem. The actual connection points between two sections of path, or even between an intersection and a normal part of the path, don't seem to affect how the vehicle stops. Instead, it seems like they stop at a certain distance back from the intersection point based on when the intersection is filled by another vehicle. I think the intention is for them to stop at a fixed distance back from the intersection point, regardless of whether they do so in an intersection block or a normal roadblock of the path. As soon as the vehicle clears the intersection block, regardless of how big the physical intersection area is, the stopped vehicle will start moving again. This is similar to how block signals work with trains, but the actual lines where the blocks begin and end don't seem to matter as much. Sometimes though, I noticed that a vehicle would be stopped way back, for seemingly no real reason. This seems to be dependent on how you build the roads, and building them so that intersections are as small as physically possible should solve this problem. This will involve building shorter chunks at a time. If you just build a long chunk of path all at once, you can end up in a situation where an intersection is actually a really huge chunk of the road, and a vehicle can get effectively deadlocked because an intersection that is physically far away has a vehicle in it. Because that section is so long, it might get stopped multiple times and for a long time, while other vehicles occupy what the path considers to be an intersection. So, especially if you have a lot of vehicles on the road, build your intersections deliberately and build them small. That disclaimer aside, it doesn't seem to be the case every single time. The vehicles seem to have some level of knowledge that a vehicle is going to leave an intersection, so it starts moving in anticipation of that. Again, all of this only really matters if you have a lot of vehicles in a small area, which I don't think is really going to be the case for most situations. So this is more just an interest in how the system works and less about how it's practically going to end up being used in your save. Priority. Speaking of niche scenarios, I was super curious about the priority for intersections and how right-of-way works. Let's try looking at this clip I recorded, where I have 2 wide lane crossing turns plus a straightaway that goes through them. 2 explorers and a tractor approach the intersection. The tractor is physically farther away, nowhere near the intersection, when the explorer on the right starts to slow down. After it clears the intersection, another explorer shows up at the bottom, and it seems like it's going to prioritize that lane since it's already in motion, but then the explorer on the left, which is now the most recently stopped lane, goes. Then the explorer on the right goes, followed by the explorer on the bottom, which forces a tractor on the left to stop for it. A truck comes from the right and waits for the intersection to clear, then starts moving again, leaving the tractor on the left stopped still. The next truck may have been too far back to trigger the intersection, so the tractor can now go. But an explorer gets stopped by the truck after that. So, what's the priority logic here? Well, I'm not quite sure, but this is my best guess. It seems like most of the time, the vehicle that has been stopped for the longest gets priority when the intersection is clear, which makes sense, that's just right of way. However, there are some times where this is not the case, and based on what's happening during those times, that makes me think that maybe the vehicles themselves have levels of priority, with trucks being at the top. This makes sense to me because trucks are the slowest and the largest, therefore they need the most time to accelerate. Tractors and explorers seem to share priority, which can cause some inconsistencies in how they seem to give each other priority. You can observe this in the clip I showed by the fact that the explorers and tractors defer to normal right-of-way standards, but this is broken as soon as a truck enters the roadway, taking all priority for itself. I'm not 100% sure about this theory, but it seems to be the case most of the time. If you're observing something different, let me know in the comments. But in most scenarios, I don't think any of this actually matters. I purposefully made a traffic jam here for testing purposes and because I was curious. And in a real functioning factory, I doubt you would have this kind of density of vehicles and intersections. But if you do, I hope this helps you. Blueprints. So, do vehicle paths work in blueprints? The answer is yes. They work like train tracks in this case as well. But that also means that they have the same sort of issue that train tracks do, where if you place 2 blueprints next to each other normally, they won't actually be connected even though they're touching. The solution here is Blueprint Auto Connect build mode. Paths, much like rails, do work in this mode, letting you drag out the path from a blueprint. But if you've built a roadway blueprint, you won't have the concrete and other parts extending out along the path. Well, you'll still want to use Auto Connect mode, but instead of actually dragging out the blueprint, just connect them right up to each other, as if you were building normally. This kind of bridges the gap between the 2 methods, letting you just build the blueprints right next to each other, but using the minimum distance allowed in Auto Connect mode, which is 0 meters. This works for rails and belts too, allowing you to keep those things connected across blueprints. The ability to extend blueprints with Auto Connect mode is usually the most exciting part, but it's important to remember that it works to literally connect parts of blueprints even at the shortest distance. So go ahead, integrate these paths into your highway blueprints that you maybe already have, and start building. So that's everything you need to know about building a truck route in Satisfactory 1.2 and beyond. The old system certainly had a lot of charm to it, and it was kind of fun to actually drive the route that your trucks would end up going, and it was nice to be able to load them up if you wanted to use that same path, just load it on a new vehicle. But I think that all in all, this new system is an overall improvement. A lot of people avoid using vehicles to move things and just go right from belts to trains because vehicles are just such a headache. When you have trains, you know what to expect. They go on their route that you've defined. And now, vehicles will be able to do the exact same thing. If you're a vehicle hater who's excited to be able to use them now in 1.2, let me know in the comments. I know I'm going to start using them a lot more. In fact, my current save doesn't have any trucks because they are a pain, but I'm going to start using them a lot more now. Anyways, if you liked this video, be sure to like it and subscribe if you want more content like this, and I'll see you in the next one.